Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and welcome to the CA Process Automation Community Webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. I would now like to turn the call over to Hendry. You may begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webcast. Just as a reminder, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A panel and not the chat panel. We will give some time at the end for questions as well. I'm going to talk on some best practices in doing process automation in PAM. And then I'm going to hand over to Gordon Brandyburg, who is going to talk on some of the talk a little about the roadmap that we currently have. Sorry. Okay, so let's start. On my agenda, I'm assuming that everybody can see the presentation. On the agenda, I'm going to start off with what I refer to as before you start. So kind of before you actually log into PAM and start doing anything. Then I'm going to talk around some design principles, some development guidelines, some implementation guidelines of principles, and then we'll have some time for questions. So before you start, and this is something that I've kind of learned over the years, and that is to design the process in a tool like Visio. The reason for that is it's easier to redo the process in Visio. And what you would do is you don't map out your process that you want to automate in Visio, and then you need to step through that process, whether out loud with some colleagues or just in your mind, and work through it and try and find problems with your design of your workflow before you actually implement it. On some of my bigger projects, I've spent as much as 3-4 weeks just working in Visio, generating the processes, stepping through it, changing them all, stepping through it, changing it, and going through sort of 20 to 30 iterations before I even start implementing it in PAM. Now, doing that and going through so many different iterations in Visio, as I said, it can take 2 to 4 weeks. But if I could go through as many iterations and changes in PAM itself, you're looking at 2 to 4 months potentially. So you could seriously compromise your project timelines if you don't do something like this. It doesn't have to be Visio. Even if you just do it on paper, draw out the process, step through it, get someone else to step through it, find any errors, change it, until you're happy that you think you've got it all. And I guarantee you, even then when you implement it, you're still going to go through iterations as you improve on it. And part of that improvement process is as you learn more and more about PAM. I mean, I've been working with PAM for many years now, and I still learn better ways to do things on a regular basis. The second thing before you start is requirements. Now, it's really important to understand exactly what the requirements are before you start. Unfortunately, I know in the real world, very often the requirements which you should be getting from the customer is not very clearly defined or very clearly documented. But work on those requirements. Make sure that you understand the requirements, question the requirements, and so that you get as detailed the requirements documented as you can. Even if you document it for yourself, it doesn't have to be official documentation. Make sure that you have it. And related to the requirements is the expected result. Know what the end result of your the process you're doing should be. because that, again, kind of helps you with when you define it, making sure that you actually deliver what is expected. Quite often, trying to understand that expected results helps clarify the requirements as well. And then inputs, although I guess that should actually say inputs and outputs. Understand what inputs are, what data you will be getting. Do you need additional data during the process? Where do you get it from? How do you get it? What will the outputs be? Do you need to connect to some external systems, some internal systems, bespoke systems? Are there connectors? Do we need to develop connectivity for these systems? So all of that type of information. And the best way, actually, is to, in your project plan, put time aside where you don't even log into PAM and just work on this type of information. I know it's not the exciting stuff to do, but at the end of the day, it's going to save you a huge amount of time and effort. So if we go down to design principles, I've got about 6 or 7 sort of major design principles that I think are absolutely crucial to having a successful and good process at the end of it. Firstly, make it modular in design. And the reason for this is if I take the overall process, break it into a couple of modules, it means that first, these could be logical, they could be functional, okay? Now, when I talk about a module, it's just a process. So if I'm, for instance, at the moment I'm working on a project where I'm doing a two-way ticket exchange. Now, it's essentially one process, but in terms of PAM, I've actually got about 10 or 15 different processes. Some of them get used a lot of times, and that's part of your reusability. The other reason that I've got it modular is because it means that I don't have any long-running processes. They all just start, do what they need to, finish, and then something else carries on. It's easier to maintain. It's clear to see exactly what those different bits do in terms of the overall process. So how that will break down will differ from, between each project. So you design them in such a way that you can call these processes from others. So you need to understand what data goes in, what comes out the other end. Are you passing data around? Do you go and extract data from a central database? There's no real definitive rule on this. As I said, each project will differ. And also, once you've completed with it and it gets handed over to someone else to maintain, it does make maintenance easier and simpler. And also, when working on individual processes, it's less complicated. The other advantage that you have with doing a modular design is that you can have multiple developers working on the bigger process, because you can have some individuals working on one process, everybody working on a different component or different module within that overall process. Then the next one is it needs to be data-driven. The processing logic is driven by the data. You don't want to hard code anything into your processes whatsoever. So you must be able to derive anything you need from the data and then use the data to be able to manipulate and make, for your decision-making processes. The reason for this is in future, moving forward, when you need to make any changes, it becomes easier if you haven't hard-coded anything. It also allows you to build your process in such a way that it will naturally evolve as the data changes, it will deal with it. Whereas if you've hard-coded anything, then you restrict it, because then if it changes, if the data changes or if there's some additional data or something, you need to go and modify processes, and you really don't want to do that if you can prevent it. The next design principle is what I refer to generally as just using configuration rules. So, sorry. have a named data set where you have some configuration data sets with different amounts of variables. And that can be for, you can use it for a lot of things. Things like, let's say, if we again talk, just use the example of the process that I'm busy building at the client at the moment for two-way ticket exchange. I need to extract certain fields from service desk for incidents. So I'll have an array variable in that configuration data set that has a list of fields that I need to extract. But then I'll have a different array in there for the different ticket types. So there'll be one for incident, there'll be one for problem, there'll be one for change, service request, etc. Now, to be able to go and read the configuration rules, again, you don't want to go and hard code that. So there needs to be a way to be able to determine the ticket type. Now, at this particular client, their ticket numbers are prefixed. So all incidents have an I hyphen in front. So if I go and extract, if I get the ticket number, I can go and strip out the first letter, know that it's an I, change it all to lowercase, change it to uppercase, whichever, and then use that in conjunction with the fields to extract. So if my variable in that named data set is called I_fields_extract, I can then build up that name to go and read it. So I might be hard coding the fields to extract bit, but the rest of it's not. And that way I can have different rules for different ticket types and different, based on my data again. So that kind of shows you having a data-driven and the configuration rules. And again, it helps prevent hard coding, because if I had to go and actually code in my process what fields I'm extracting, it means that could be multiple places where I have to list those fields. So now the user or the client comes to me and says, oh, we want to add another field. I've got to go and edit that 10 different places. If I'm using a configuration rule like this, I just go and add it to the list and automatically it deals with it, because anywhere in my process where I need to process data, I go and fetch that array of fields and I process them, because when I extract the data, I take that name, because I've got the name that I'm extracting it as, and I'm going to add process dot in front of it, and I've got my variable name. So I'm not even hard coding what my variable names are. They are driven by the configuration and by the data. So in that way, I can just go and loop through that list and then process the data. And again, if I use then, let's say where I've got to send out the data, I'm using an XML file, I can go and add tags into that XML file, which is the field name, but with 2 underscores on either side, in the front and the back. And again, then it means I can go and loop through that list and then go and do replaces on my template to go and replace the data. And I'm not coding those variable names or the field names anywhere in my process. So in future, I want to add extra fields. I modify my XML template. I add the field to my list of fields to extract, and it'll take care of it. Okay. The other thing that you always need to think about is something like store and port type capabilities. Now, this is only where applicable. It's not applicable for all processes. But it's the idea of where if, for instance, I get some data, my process does something, I need to go and update a ticket in service desk. If that update fails, either the ticket is locked, service desk is down or something, I've got to be able to build in the functionality to know that I've got a transaction there that has not been processed, and that I can reprocess it at some point in the future. So in case of a connection type failure, if I understand the failure, I can build in logic whereby if it fails and the failure reason is something that I understand, I can automatically go into a loop and wait for a predefined period of time, which again is in my configuration rules, and then retry again. So in that way, I can have it automatically retry until it's successful. Or again, in my configuration, I can specify I can have 5 retries. After 5, it'll then fail and not reprocess it. So it just allows us to be able to deal with certain types of failures that we know about in a structured approach and in a meaningful way, and also means that hopefully we have no lost transactions. All right, then moving on, the next 3 are probably the 3 things that most people least like to do, but I think they're probably amongst the most important. One is auditing. Now, as much as PAM does provide auditing for the actual process, I'm talking about creating an audit table where you insert information about the transactions that you're actually processing so that you can see. Firstly, you'll be able to go and report on that auditing to see how many transactions were processed. Any that were unsuccessful, you can report on. You can go and report, you can go and create auditing records for every connection failure that you have and log that into the audit. Because then again, if you report that, you'll be able to go and go back and say, you know, in the last week, we've had 50 connection failures to service desk. It might mean that service desk is really busy, or it might be indicative of a problem. But if you don't do any of this auditing, guaranteed at some point someone's going to come along and say, "Oh, how many times you failed to connect to service desk?" And you won't be able to answer that. So building that in from the beginning as part of your design makes it so much easier. And again, if you go back to using a modular approach, you could have a single process that does auditing records, and you just give it data and it goes and does what it needs to do. So you're reusing that code as well. And then again, reporting. And part of the reporting and auditing, you can also go and create some statistics on some of the process, you know, within your processes on the work that it's doing and the transactions going through, and then report on those. And that reporting could be a start request form where someone will go and fill in, date parameters or something, or ticket numbers, or depending on what it is that you've done, and it'll go away, run the report, and email it to them. And then I guess the bane of all developers' lives, documentation. But here again, when we're designing these processes, it's really important that there are 2 types of documentation that we provide. One is what I would refer to as user documentation. So that'll be for the system administrators or whoever actually utilizes your processes, so that they know how it works, what to expect, where, you know, how to kind of look after it and troubleshoot it. Because that'll possibly be broken into sort of 2 areas. One is actually just using, and the other one will be possibly supporting it. And then you want developer documentation. Because, again, you know, we might move on to another project, we might even change company or something, and someone will need to look after what we've done in the past. And that development documentation will help them to maintain that process that you've created. Doesn't need to be a War and Peace type manual. Could, in some cases, it will only be a couple of pages. But it's still important to have. All right, then when we go to the development guidelines, now some of these do kind of go over the design principles because it's closely related. So the first one is the no hard-coded data. And for a lot of the same reasons why I spoke about using configuration items and being data-driven. If you hard code anything, it becomes a nightmare to try and change in the future. And as the process grows and becomes more complicated and larger, the more difficult it is to be able to do that and make sure that you change it in all the correct places when you do have to make the change. So I would avoid hard coding data, like the plague. And then the configurations to drive your process, as I said previously, easier to modify, also easier to move between environments. You'll see a bit later, I'll talk about having in the implementation, I'll talk about having two different types of configuration data sets. One which is kind of generic to your process or your project, and one that is environment specific. So the environment specific would be things like server names, URLs for web services, or something like that, which you don't necessarily want to migrate from dev into test because they're different. But your generic configurations, you do want to migrate across. So you want to separate those out. The ability to retry on failures and know that we had failures. So not only be able to reprocess it or deal with those failures. So any failures that we know about and we can do something like try and deal with it, whether it's a retry, whether it's even just logging it or something like that, but do something about it and record that we had these failures so that we know what's happened. It also allows us, if we build that in, it allows us to possibly degrade gracefully. So for instance, if we talk about a communication failure to a system, if we are polling possibly, and processing hundreds of transactions to some particular system, and you have a connection failure, you want to do something where you can sort of say, after 6 connect failures, change the polling interval to 5 minutes. After 10, change it to 30 minutes. After 20, change it to an hour. So it just slows down gracefully, and then the transactions that need to be processed just stack up. And the first time you have a successful connection, you go reset that and you work at your normal interval. So, it's really important, and being able to deal with failures that we understand makes a big difference, because firstly, if we can deal with those failures, it means that the process is still complete and come to an end and have done something meaningful, as opposed to just purely failing or aborting and it hasn't actually achieved anything. And then the other thing that's really useful is to have standardized error handling. Now, this could be per project, or you can have it system-wide. So, again, you would create a process of, you can call it your error handling process, and every time you have an error and you fail, when you head down towards your abnormal stop, you would first call this process before you go to the abnormal stop, and it can do so. Now, there you have a raft of things that you potentially could do. You could be sending emails to some support email address, could be logging errors in some sort of help desk system. I don't know, it could be logging records in a database you can report on, whatever, depending on what the error handling is that you're wanting to do. You could do multiple of those things, and then you call it from all your processes. Now, if you do this sort of standardized error handling, then if you want to change your error handling, so for instance, let's say we've set up our error handling to go and log a call into SDM, and now the corporation decides, no, they don't want to do that anymore. They just want to send an email to support personnel. It's one process you change. You don't need to go and change it in every single other place, because it's a central standardized error handling routine. So it does make life a lot simpler and easier. Reusability, that should be a really high priority, and that fits in with a modular design. And you don't want to go and develop the same code or the same process more than once. So if we take, for instance, updating a ticket in SDM, instead of going writing that bit of, there's a couple of operators that you would use with that. Instead of going and doing that every single time you want to go and update a ticket, you create an update ticket process that you call from all these different places. The advantage of using a lot of the modular design is, for instance, let's say with SDM. So we're going to use the service desk connectors, we're logging tickets or we're updating tickets to in SDM, and the corporation decides they're switching from SDM to ServiceNow, or CA releases the software as a service version of SDM, and now you want to switch to using web services instead of the custom operators. Again, it's one process you're going to change, and everything that uses it will then automatically just deal with it, and it's less disruptive, quicker to change. Then you also want to try and make your process multi-thread wherever possible. Firstly, it gives you better performance, so you can process more transactions through. It avoids bottlenecks. Although one big thing in a transactional type environment that you really have to be careful about and think about is transaction sequencing, if it's important. So if I process some sort of transaction and it goes and creates a record, and then I receive an update to that record, which I go and modify, and then another update to that, if I process those in the wrong sequence, I could have problems. Firstly, I'm trying to update something that doesn't exist, or even if I process update in the wrong sequence, I could actually erase one of the updates because of the data. So in some environments, it is really important to think about that sequencing and how you make sure that you're processing all of those transactions in the correct sequence. And for instance, in the ticket exchange system I'm doing, that is really important, but it's equally important for us to multi-thread. So we do track and know what ticket we're working with and whether there's the next transaction is for the same ticket or not, and we ensure that we keep things in the right sequence. So it's a case of processing every single transaction in the same order in which you received it. Right, then when you get to implementation, this is just some of the practicalities. So, for instance, multiple PAM processes make up the process. So whatever the processes that I'm automating, whether it be onboarding a new user, a leavers process, it'll be made up of not just one PAM process, but a number of them, because there's going to be components that can be reused not only within my process, but with other processes. So, for instance, if we take two different processes, onboarding a new person and a leaver process, they both got to go and update the Active Directory, for instance. So it's just the actual transaction type that's different. So we can have a Active Directory update process that gets called by both of them to do the same thing. Okay. And then this is where I speak about the difference between the general configuration PAM data sets, environment specific. And again, there's some of the examples will be server names, fields to extract, web service URLs, user and password. Again, obviously, if you're storing passwords in there, make sure that the passwords are set as a type of password so it's encrypted, otherwise people can see it. Always look at using XML or JSON for your data exchange. XML is a little easier to work with. There are built-in tools within PAM and within JavaScript to be able to deal with XML. PAM has the ability to take data and convert it to an XML for you, or actually read XML and build a data set out of that for you, some variables, which normally consists of nested arrays and value maps. And also web services for calls to other systems, and also for inbound using web services. Because firstly, the call data for that XML can be dynamically built. it simplifies your design when you have one web service call, but the XML can differ. So whether I'm doing a create or an update, I still do a web service call. So I can just have a generic web service call, and it's just what XML I pass it for that web service call that differs. So quite often that's easier. Sometimes, for instance, on one of my projects, I've actually switched out all of the service desk connectors for web service calls to service desk because there were a couple of things I needed to do which the service desk connectors couldn't do. So instead of having a mix and match of the stuff, I standardized everything on service desk. So it's all the same throughout my process. Not sure that I would necessarily say switching out your web service connector your service desk connector for web services. I wouldn't classify that as best practice. But for me, it would help with standardization throughout. So, it was driven by a specific requirement. That's really it. The one other thing I would mention is in terms of code reusability, you have the ability to have JavaScript files that you can load into the library and reuse them by just doing an include statement in any of your calculation operators or in pre and post execution. So one of the common uses for that is building up a message that gets sent for your error handling. So I have a standard if statement where if the result is equals 1, it doesn't include, and then that will build up a message that gets sent to the standardized error handling. So that bit of JavaScript, if I need to change that, how I build that message, what I put in the message, again, it's just the JavaScript file in the library I change, and automatically all of the processes that use it will have the new code. Are there any questions?
As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question over the phone, simply press star 1 on your telephone keypad. Again, that's star 1 to ask a question. And you do have a question from the line of Hung Nguyen.
Yes, I have a question. You hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Can you send out the document you just presented on the Webex?
Yes, Mary, can we put that onto the? We can put that onto the community board, can't we?
Yes, we'll put the recording and the presentation in the Webcast archive in the community message board in a day or so.
Okay, thank you very much.
And again, to ask a question, press star 1. There are currently no further phone questions.
All right, well, then I think I'll hand over to Gordon, and Gordon can talk to us about the roadmap. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Hendry. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So I just wanted to take a few moments here to just give a quick update on where we are with the roadmap for process automation. We have actually just posted an updated roadmap on the support site, the Word document format that, or the PDF format that some of you may be familiar with. I know when we typically do presentations, obviously we do them in PowerPoint, but the official external version is actually in a PDF format, and it's been updated on the support site for PAM. So, as many of you know, we recently came out with our 4.2 release. It came out December 27th of 2013. And the overall focus of that, as we discussed many times, was really trying to drive the performance and clustering deployment stability to the next level in terms of our ability to support enterprise-wide deployments. And we've gotten some very good feedback on those areas so far. In addition to that, we also added a new mode of agent communications. So for those of you who are using agents as part of your PAM deployments, the previous implementation essentially required two-way inbound connections to be, enabled, which essentially meant that wherever you placed an agent, if there was a firewall sitting in front of it, there was a pretty good chance you would need to make modifications to that firewall to accommodate inbound connections from the orchestrator to the agent. In 4.2, we added a new model that, essentially provides an implementation where the only connection is an outbound initiated connection from the agent. So the agent will reach out to the orchestrator, that connection will be persisted, and then all future communication between the two will be sent down that pipe. We are still supporting the old mode of agent communications, at least through the 4.2 release and all the way through the 4.3 release. And then, after some future point in time, we will look at, essentially removing the old model of communication from support in the product. But we currently don't have a definitive time frame for when that will occur. In addition to the agent communications, as well as the performance improvements and some clustering simplification, we also added a few things around how we deal with data sets. Essentially it boils down to we've provided a model such that if you are using, these global data sets as Henry was referring to, so if you have a data set where you want to store your environment variables and then you read those variables in from a variety of different processes, we've made the accessing and locking associated with accessing those types of data sets far less restrictive. So it will no longer really be a bottleneck when you have a global data set that a lot of processes are reading from. They won't essentially get queued up for access to reading that global data set. In 4.1, we added, based on the implementation with JBoss, we had a added dependency on requiring XA transactions on your database server. That has now been removed as part of 4.2. We've also added a new content object, a new automation object called a content package. So previously we had, those of you who were really familiar with all the various objects that we had available, there was a object called a package previously made available. But what we've done is essentially introduced a new object that is intended to replace and drastically expand on the capabilities of that old package object. And what this content package object is intended to do is, as you go through a project, you're creating not just one or two processes, but you're probably creating forms to go with that project. You're also creating data sets and various other automation objects in addition to, the myriad of processes that you're creating. And when you want to essentially release that from development into test and then test into development, there was really no good way to maintain the properties of those objects so that, hey, when I import this from dev into test, how do I know what version of this in test that I have? So we've created this content package object that allows you to essentially bundle, the set of, automation objects that are associated with a particular project or a particular release of a solution that you're creating. And then you can give it metadata at the release level that specifies, a release name, a release version. You can also lock it in terms of when someone imports this, they can execute it, but they can't modify it. And so what that allows you to do is, once something goes into production, now if something goes wrong in production and you're trying to debug what the issue is, you can also check to see okay, is this the version that we released, or have modifications been made to this or attempted to have been made to this in some form or fashion. We've also improved the, in terms of our import and export. On the import, there was a situation if you had really large, import XML files, you could get into a situation where the system would time out before you were able to complete the import. We've enhanced that import process, so now you can essentially import, a file of any arbitrary size into the system without having to worry about it timing out before that completes. We've also revamped the Java operator. So, we know that not many of our customers have currently used the Java operator. It's something we introduced relatively recently. I think it came in maybe the 4.0 release. But it's essentially an operator that you can use if you have some external jar files that you want to be able to call and access from within PAM. And the issue, one of the issues that we had with the previous implementation was the way it was executed. If you ran that on the orchestrator, so if I just said, hey, I want to be able to call this operator, I will run it on my local orchestrator, then if your code was, either was poorly written and had bugs, or, someone could essentially implement some malicious code that could, essentially stomp on the process space of the orchestrator itself. And so it was very possible for someone to shut down the orchestrator, inadvertently or intentionally by using Java code and leveraging this Java operator. So as part of the updates, we've restricted the operation of this operator to agents only. And we're recommending, if you are going to leverage the Java operator, that you essentially, dedicate a specific agent to, executing these types of operations, so that if you're using your agent for something else, then having that, if anything goes wrong and that agent is corrupted by something in the Java code, it doesn't impact other actions that particular agent might be taking on behalf of other processes. And then lastly, we added SQL name instance support in terms of the installation. So now if you're installing with SQL Server and you want to specify a named instance for the installation, that's supported directly in the UI now, as well as support for EEM 12.5. So previously we were compatible with EEM 12.5, but we only supported, in terms of being able to access capabilities in the actual API, we only supported, I think, the 8.4 implementation. Now we still support 8.4, but we also have now full support for 12.5 as well. So our next release is actually a service pack or a point release to 4.2. It's 4.2.1, and that will be coming out shortly. And the main thing that we're addressing here is with the release of JRE 7U51, it no longer supports self-sign jar files. And what that means is, in order to avoid issues with Java security settings when you deploy new agents or new orchestrators, when you move to JRE 7U51, we are signing and repackaging all the core jar files and connector jar files that ship with PAM out of the box. So as part of that service pack or that point release, you'll get all new signed jar files and connected files, so that you don't have to deal with any issues in terms of changing security settings in order to get around the new Java requirement. We're also doing some enhancements to our agent communications that we introduced in 4.2. So with the initial implementation, it was really to validate and to get an initial working model out. In 4.2.1, we're working on increasing the scalability of that model. So essentially what we're doing is we're putting in improvements that will allow us to scale out to a much larger number of agents, and our target is to be able to support at least a minimum of I believe, as part of this 2,000 agents. I'll have to go back and confirm, but I think our target for SP1 is 2,000 agents with the new model. And also there are just some various bug fixes that were released as patches to either 4.2 after it was released, or there were other things that came late in the release cycle that were released as patches to either 4.1 or even sometimes 3.1 that we would have rolled into 4.2 if it wasn't about to go GA. So we're now incorporating those back into the main line as part of the SP1 release. And while we're working on that dot release, the service pack, we've also begun work on our subsequent release, our next minor release, which will be PAM 4.3. And the major thing that we're really focusing on as part of that release, and it will come out in stages, but the overall goal is really to provide a repository and a development environment such that you, the user community, can now share either content that you have created, and specifically connectors, whether they're custom operator-based connectors, SOAP-based, based on SOAP or script, or some underlying protocol, but also Java-based modules as well. You can create those or modify existing ones, and you'll have a common repository that you can go to and search for and find and update and share comments and update proposals for those connectors, which will basically allow us to grow the connector inventory that we have at a much faster rate. Because, from speaking to a lot of you, either in phone conversations or in person on various site visits, I can tell you that across the board, there's a lot of content that we have out there that folks have built within PAM, and specifically for integrations to third-party systems and non-proprietary systems that would be useful for other users in the community. We just haven't had a very, very clear and easy way to go about sharing that. And then I also know that there's a subset of the user community, and a meaningful subset, that are interested in creating more formal-based modules versus just basic custom operators. but we haven't really provided you the tools and capabilities to make that, a easy activity to engage in. And so as part of this, connector model update, we are looking to, essentially provide both, provide the repository and the environment for sharing the connectors, and also the tools that one would need in the, SDK and examples, an Eclipse plugin to help with the, the development for building out Java-based, proper, Java-based PAM modules. The next thing that we have, and we don't have, if you, excuse me, there have been a number of DAR requests and enhancements that have come in over the past year or so, and given our focus, really from 4.1 and especially in 4.2 on, a lot of the performance improvements in more internal architecture type work, we've had to push out the delivery of several, pretty highly requested usability features that have come in from specific customers. So we're taking, a good portion of the 4.3 release to try and address some of those more frequently requested features that we have. We've had in our backlog. Some of them around, usability enhancements to the data set editor. There's some work that we're doing to improve the behavior when you have operators in loops and what happens to the data associated with them. We've also done some things, or we're working on some things to improve the reset operator behavior as well, in addition to several other features that have come in from our various customers. And then the next item that we're really focusing on, again, goes to the agent communications that we've mentioned before. What we're really targeting here is now with the new agent communication model, we're taking a look at how we are tracking the status of agents and how that's reflected in the system and the frequency with it's updated and essentially how that all works together in terms of you being able to execute an operation on a particular agent at any particular time. So we are looking at how we present those agents in the UI, as well as how we present that status and how it impacts the execution of operations, and essentially making some updates to that model to make it more efficient and also less restrictive in terms of actually being able to execute an operation and getting a result back against a particular agent. And then we have some various forms enhancements, specifically around how we retrieve data. So we've had some requests come in both from customers as well as some internal users about making it easier to be able to load data from either a PAM data set or from a SQL query into a PAM form. So we're adding and enhancing some of the functions that we have that support that to make those easier and more powerful when you're working with forms. The other thing that we're looking at, we've had a sort of a long-running history with this automation object dependency mapping. We've tried to implement this a couple times now, and it's been pushed out. But the goal here is to be able to provide you with the ability to find out where a particular automation object is being used elsewhere in the library, so that if you're going to make a change to a particular object you can find out what type of ramifications those changes might have based on where that object is referenced. And then finally, we're making some changes that will both improve the overall performance of the system, further increasing the process throughput, increasing the ability for our processing of events, so the send event and receive events, we're getting some significant improvements in the rate at which we can send and process, those events, as well as, efforts to reduce the rate at which the database growth occurs. So I think with some of the latest numbers that we're seeing, we're getting almost a 60% reduction in terms of the rate of growth over, a heavy loaded system over, a day's time. So, obviously that will be, a huge help in terms of planning, for how much database capacity you need, over time with the lifespan of process automation. So I think we're at the top of the hour now, and that pretty much covers everything I wanted to talk about here. For all of these, there's more details if you look in the on the support site with the latest version of the roadmap presented there. There's more details and around the things that we've talked about here, and probably later on in the year we'll come back and do a more extended roadmap presentation. So I just wanted to get a quick highlight on our current plans as we move into our next fiscal year. Any questions, Victoria?
As a reminder, if you would like to ask a phone question, press *1. And there are currently no phone questions.
Thank you very much, Hendry and Gordon, for presenting today. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Again,
thank you
for your participation.
Thanks,
This
guys.
concludes today's conference. You may now disconnect.